Well, great. As Joe mentioned, I'm Christina Goldschmidt, and I'm the VP and Head of Product Design at Etsy, and I'm really honored to be closing out the conference with my talk on scaling design orgs. As we were just discussing, for those that don't know, Etsy is the global marketplace for unique and creative goods. And a little bit more about me. So I do have an MBA and have worked in management consulting at Accenture. So today I'm going to share a framework with you so that you'll understand that I love a good framework. But also I've had the pleasure of leading design teams at a variety of Fortune 500 companies as well. And I also teach. So I teach at NYU Stern's Business School and a couple of other places where I really work to try and expose future business leaders to design thinking. I think it's really important to make sure that they understand design so it's a lot easier for us to be understood and make sure that we have a seat at the table. So the goal, regardless of the size of your team, it would be wonderful if we have happy and high-performing design teams. And how you grow really can help determine if that's possible. Now, the title of my talk cites this idea of scaling, but that implication focuses on growth. I would be remiss if I didn't actually mention in today's climate that there could actually be the need for retraction. And so the scenarios that I'm going to share today could equally apply to if you needed to right-size your organization. So you can think about all of these questions and approaches, how you would need to, whether you need to grow or right-size your business. So please keep that in mind as we're going through the discussion today. So when I was in consulting, I worked on a new ventures team. And our thesis was that you could invent a net new business or an adjacent business model for one of the Fortune 500 companies, and that would actually be the future of their business. And so think about a good example would be someone like Blockbuster Video. What would have happened if they took the opportunity when it was presented to them to buy Netflix over what they actually chose to do, which was to purchase Circuit City? I wonder where they would be today and sort of the future of the landscape if they had made that choice instead. So our approach, as you can sort of see illustrated here, was to start small and to ideate on an MVP of what that business could be. So think of that really as that very initial startup phase where we would leverage as much illusion of automation as possible. And it was trying to just prove out the concept of the business to try and find product market fit and make sure that as we were able to sort of approach it, that it would actually work and be viable for customers. Then we would move to the next stage, to the incubate stage, and really try to make sure that it could grow and become a viable self-sustaining business. And then ultimately, the idea was to see if it could get to enterprise scale and really become the standalone business that could work on its own. So at every stage, I was growing a design team as we were trying every single thing and moving the business through each phases. And of course, design was a very critical part of this business at every stage because pretty much every business that we worked on had a digital component or was a fully digital business. So I was pretty much scaling nonstop over and over and over again. And that's really how I came to decide sort of the framework that I'm going to share with you today. Now, the funny part is that if you look very closely at that model, it really just was a multi-iterative approach to the product design process. Just really complicated, right? Showing it over and over and over again. So constantly cycling through things like ideate, prototype, testing, and really trying to learn multiple times at each of those stages. You saw those embedded circles at each of those stages. But the beauty and simplicity of the product design process is really that you can use it to solve anything. And once we identify a core problem, a core audience, and really the goals that we're trying to achieve, you can pretty much use the product design process to kind of solve anything. And really what I'm trying to tell you today is that you can use the processes that we use in our day-to-day work to help you learn how to scale your organization. And so the simple act of research, asking your team, asking partners, asking stakeholders, and really looking for external examples is basically that empathy step. And it can yield so much rich information pretty much every time. Now, there's going to be art in the synthesis that's really important to how we work today, and how you apply it in context is really what matters. But it's that same process and that same cycle that I want you to go through as you're working on your organization. And I have 9 pillars that make up this framework, 9 areas of investigation that will really help you figure out the right kind of model to make to scale your team. And so just knowing, like in a good product, that you should be constantly working and iterating on your model or on your org model, I think is really important. And thinking that like everything is a test, maybe sometimes it's super small tests as opposed to massively reorging or massively changing the type of organization you have, should give you the flexibility to really approach this in the right way and in the right mindset. But let's dive in and take a closer look at each of these 9 pillars and how to apply each of them. So the first thing that I want to start with is the overall business context that you're operating in. We basically work for businesses, so knowing what the larger business goals are and the larger business context that you're in is going to be vital for you to start this journey. Setting goals, understanding the impact that you're trying to drive, how you're going to measure success for your team, basically understanding if there are any other companies that are similar, that have faced similar challenges to you, that might be role models for you, could be very helpful. And also, I think it's a really good exercise to go back to the design maturity model that Envision put out, because it's actually really good work. And it can help you explore and understand different ways of thinking and working, and determine, where do I want to be, or where am I right now? And how could I use that to help me design the right sort of organizational structure and approach for my team? The next thing is to actually craft a design vision. A design vision is in and of itself a mini exercise, right? You probably are creating visions for the products or the services that you're working on right now. So creating a vision for your organization is going to help you to synthesize something really important and help you get your team on board and excited. And it'll really start to uncover certain things that will help you along the way to fill out the rest of the pillars as well. So this is where you can really explore things like, what do employees and potential recruits say really attracts them to your company or your team, and what's going to motivate them to stay or join, and what really gets them the most excited, and sort of how do they see their future evolving with you and your team. And then it really helps when you're crafting a vision to write out long form answers to some critical sort of questions. Things like problems that you're trying to solve. Maybe these are issues with the company at large, or or issues that you've faced and how you've been working to date that you want to evolve. Or maybe they're just simple customer problems that you really need to tackle now at this new moment in time that are left over from that business context analysis. And then think about, is there anything that will change that you want to see change for maybe the individuals on your team, or that you want to have an impact on your industry. Those could be really cool ways to think about different ways to look at this vision. And then ultimately, what do you want the future to be like? What could be different after you sort of achieve this vision? And then use that next moment to think about those key phrases that would stand for all of these things or be inspiring. And then for your vision, think about if you want it to be a concept-based vision or a quality-based vision. And just to give you some examples, here are two, one from Whole Foods, that's a concept-based one, to nourish people and the planet, or one from Nordstrom's, that's quality-based, to serve our customers better, to always be relevant in their lives, and to form lifelong relationships. And then ultimately, how do you make a final statement that's going to be memorable and ambitious and unique? Because you want your team to be able to repeat this as that mantra that helps them move forward. All right, now I'm going to talk about org models and ratios. Probably most of you thought that the majority of my talk was just going to be focused on this. But I think that this is only one component. Yes, it's a very, 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 very important component. And if you're undertaking this for the first time, or if you're not used to doing this work, I highly recommend you read this book, Org Design for Design Orgs. It's a really helpful study in how to think about different org structures and org approaches, and I found it very helpful. But there are sort of known conventions for the type of company that you work for, the stage of growth that your company's at. And you'll get information about that from things like when you do some of your competitive analysis and looking for role model companies who are in similar situations as you, this will probably start to emerge if you don't already have a pulse on that already. But you'll start to sort of understand some peer model approaches like a squads model. And this is actually what we use at Etsy, where there's one designer, one product manager to a group of engineers, and they collaborate together. Or a pods model, where there's a group of designers who are focused on an area, and they work with that one or a group of product managers and a group of engineers, but they're centralized on a topic. Or you could have a fully centralized design team, which also sometimes people refer to as an agency model, where the designers are fully centralized, and then you need to have sort of like a ticketing system to figure out and prioritize projects for them. Those are some of those peer models. There could also be some hybrid models, where maybe on a squads or a pod model, you have a separate centralized team, where maybe there's this innovation or strategy team who's coming up with new ideas, and they work in a centralized way to tackle new problems. Or there are all of these squads, but then there's one centralized team who sort of is horizontal, working to make sure that there's a unified experience sort of type thing. So there are ways to sort of do peer models, hybrid models, things like that. And then depending on the stage of growth you're at, you might actually choose a different one of those too. So if you're at a startup that's like really early stage, speed might be really important to you. So pods or a centralized model might be more important because you're swarming all your designers together to try and get that high brain activity going so that you can move through things much quicker. Whereas if you're at a more mature company, maybe the squads model works because you have lots of problems that you're tackling, and you want to drive as much autonomy as possible so that you can solve as many issues simultaneously, so that you can drive as much value as possible. So there are different ways to break down those types of models in order to determine what's right for you. Then another really important thing to think about is the relationship between product and brand. Do you want to have them be closely tied? Do you want to have them be separated? what are the benefits of that for you and your team? How important is the brand to your type of business, right? Maybe you're in something very consumer facing, maybe you're in something B2B, maybe you're in something B2B2C. That could really determine how important it is to have a deep connection between brand and product on your team. And then the types of designers you want. Do you want specialists or generalists or both? And so maybe that if you're going for a hybrid model, you have a bunch of generalists who are in a squads or a pods model, but then you have a specialist team who are one of those separate sort of innovation teams or separate, could be beautification teams or deep customer experience teams who are really working to create surprise and delight, that kind of type of thing. And then at this moment, you want to really think about ratios. And I can't tell you what is the right ratio. I think you can go after competitive research here and talk to your peers and really use that to find out. But figuring out what the right ratio is for you, for designers to researchers to content designers, and then compared to product managers and engineering is really important. And note that the level, how senior those team members are on your team will also affect that ratio that you go after. And so really understanding the financial implications at your company will also come into play here, how you make that choice. So the next thing that I would suggest that you look at are actually the career paths and the transparency around these career paths. So having an actual way for people to understand the roles and responsibilities and clear job descriptions is always helpful. And then having career ladders and competency matrix so people understand their potential and progression is really helpful. If you are really in an early stage company, of course, the career ladder and competency matrix may not be the right time for you to invest in that. But as you are scaling, these things become super important because they're going to help you with retention and also help you understand what are the things that you actually need. And so you can actually start to think about the shape of your growth trajectory because you're putting that down on paper before you're even sort of putting people into those spaces. And it helps people on your team understand the opportunity and possibility for them in the future. And then culturally, do you actually help with transparency here? Do the people on your team understand these documents? And do they understand what it actually means to get promoted? So not just what it says on that piece of paper, but things like the accomplishments and behaviors they need to do to actually achieve what it says there, and the process and the timing so that they can understand that. And then are you having open coaching sessions so that you make sure they understand this, that you have a dialogue about these documents? And do you actually understand the career goals for your team? So every quarter, I actually run a mini calibration session with all of the managers on my team where they had to have a coaching session with all of their directs to understand how their team is sort of trending towards their career goals and where they're netting out. This gives me a comprehensive picture of how everyone's doing on performance, also knowing what opportunities people are looking for. Because as things change in our company, I now have a clear opportunity for, who can we actually move into new places and how can we change and help and support people? Because I have a pulse on that every single quarter. If you are in a growth moment, one of the most important partners for you is your recruiting partner. I have actually turned down jobs before because I didn't have confidence in the recruiting process. The recruiting process for me didn't give me confidence that when I walked in the door, that recruiting was going to support me and my goal to grow the team that I needed there. So if you're in this scale moment, do you have those right partners that are going to help you? And then once you know you have a good partnership there, actually have conversations with them about the non-negotiables and where you actually are flexible. Things like cost of salaries, the benefits that you have, location. Are you open to different geographic locations? Are you willing to have people be remote? What levels of talent you're interested in? Do they have to have existing industry experience? Do they have those transferable skills? Are there industries that you think will actually work well in your industry? Are you looking for specialists or generalists? And also, what's your expected speed to fill? What's your backup plan if you can't meet that time to fill that role? Have those conversations with your recruiting partner, because then you actually can have a realistic conversation with their pulse on what's happening externally to decide if it's realistic to have the plan that you're putting in place. And then get real. Do you have a compelling, differentiated offering for the jobs that you're putting out there, especially if it's a talent market? You need to understand that and know what you're offering and what's the reason to come work at your company versus another offer out there. And that once you have a realistic understanding there, go back and look at those non-negotiables and say, okay, do I have to maneuver some of those again, knowing what my differentiation is? And then think about what your candidate experience is. Think about what your onboarding experience is going to be. These things will help you attract the right candidates to you because they're signifiers of what's to come. And also they set them up for success. And finally, my question here is, what are you as a leader doing to support the entire recruiting process? Are you out there being an evangelist for your organization? Are you able to actually support everything that's needed? Are you a visible face? And then professional development. How are you going to help your team grow? Do you believe in a path to management? Is that easy in your organization, or is that not something that's there? If you can't actually achieve things with recruiting, can you teach things? Can you build curriculums through your team, or do you need to go get them externally? How important is mentorship in this process versus peer curriculum? And what's your process for improving your overall processes? And how open are you to having people explore them? If you're actually looking for ways to improve your own professional development, remember, you can go help yourself with things like CDO school, design department, DMBA. You can also send your team to these things. They're great resources that I've sent my team to. All of these things help your team become more conversant and actually feel like you're investing in them, which is actually a wonderful thing for your culture too. Now, how you approach leadership and the leaders on your team will also matter. I really believe what Tim Cook is saying here is that teaching and coaching is a really important pillar. And here he's saying it's one of the 4 pillars of Apple leadership's model. And so coaching, I think, has emerged as this really vital skill. Do you have those skills? Can you coach your managers to coach and how to replicate themselves and really help people become the same versions of themselves and the skills that they have? And do you have managers who are really focused on that development as their number one job? And are you building this culture of empowerment versus really trying to micromanage? And is that just within your team, or is that within the culture of the company itself? And having a look in the mirror and asking yourself, what are my personal insecurities? How am I setting my team up so that what I'm afraid of is not stifling my team? How am I supporting my team regardless of what I have fears about? And then fostering diverse viewpoints, that's so critical. And do you have courage? if someone's not working out, can you help exit them from your organization before they actually affect everyone else in your organization? Because that will lead to so many issues besides just that person themselves. How are you fostering trust? How are you helping your managers foster trust? And ultimately, a big important debate, I think, right now is the role that leadership plays in the strategy of your business. Some people believe that managers right now are people leaders. Other people see the vital importance of all of that firepower for both driving strategy and people leadership. Decide what's the right thing for you and at what scale moment you are in your business. And so how you communicate, how you actually help your team becomes really important. Understanding your authentic communication style, making sure you're translating things like how they understand the business, giving them as much context as possible so they can do their jobs, understanding how much you should be meeting with them, your meeting culture. All of these things become really important to understand and facilitate culture and how they have information to do their work. And then my last one is the all-important topic of culture, rituals, and ultimately how you retain your team. So do you have those elements of the culture that you really want to understand and foster? When you're doing your conversations and inquiry, this is one of those areas you really want to probe on. And then what do you want to evolve? What rituals can you create or keep that will foster those things? And then think about, our new normal, right? What does hybrid life play into it? And who are the people who are going to help you keep a pulse on all these things? Are there other ways that you can deep dive into this? So at Etsy, we actually have a quarterly pulse check that we do with the team in order to just give them an opportunity to share with us how they feel about their work. It's completely anonymous. And then I think one of the most important things is that culture is not just up to managers. It's really important that you empower the ICs on your team to be stewards of your culture and to get involved actively in really growing and maintaining your culture. So a few extra notes on putting this into practice. Just remember that you're going to apply your product design process to going through with this empathy stage and approaching this as a test and learn approach. So you can prototype, test and learn, and iterate. And that's going to be the key to success. Do who you are, be who you are, use the processes that you have, because that's how you will authentically be able to embrace this. And lastly, remember that leadership is actually pretty lonely. And it might be when you look to your peers in other functions where you'll most likely find your actual team because they have the same challenges that you do. And also, resiliency is key. Do whatever you can to take care of yourself first and foremost, because if you can't mind your own mental health and show up as a resilient leader, you can't take care of your team. All right. Thank you all so much. With that, happy to take any questions.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that, Christina. A lot of great information provided there. And, I can kind of, anybody wants to type questions in the chat, I can watch out for those. But I have something I could start with, which was you're thinking about the organization that you represent and your experience in design. Have you identified that things about your organization have caused you to think differently or uniquely in any ways about you, how you do the things that you've presented here, or are these just generally good things that all organizations will find?
Yeah. What I actually found was that when I came to Etsy, it actually reinforced these ways of thinking. that I was able to leverage this process when I joined Etsy about 3.5 years ago. And that as we evolved, that I really think about it as when are the right moments to try new things and processes, and when are the right moments to really try and evolve. And actually, Etsy itself has this deep culture of experimentation. And so that probably is the one thing that I would add to this more, is that certain cultures actually really embrace this idea of test and learn more than anywhere else. So I have that ability to learn, to lean into it. So we sort of have this notion that you can call anything a pilot and you can try anything because it's a pilot. And that gives you this liberty to try things and experiment with things. And so that culture of experimentation really opens up this ability to try new things and be open to really constantly saying, how can we make improvements? How can we look for opportunities to try new and optimize things that are going to work for us?
Well, Melissa made a comment. Love the call out to mental health, and as someone who's worked, well, I'm fairly old, so somebody's kind of worked in the tech industry for a long time. That was rarely, if ever, brought up as an issue, earlier in my career. Obviously, we evolve in progressive ways, but you have any thoughts to expand on in that area in terms of how it fits into your ideas about leadership and an organization?
Yeah, actually, one of my personal missions is to destigmatize mental health in the workplace. So I really appreciate the question, Melissa. Thank you for that. And what happened was during the pandemic, I saw this deep need for people to actually get support, and that the reality is that our jobs are replacing all of the support that we used to get from other institutions. Now our workplaces are really doing that for us, especially because they're a main source of our benefits. And the one thing that I can share is that I found that when I was vulnerable and open about my personal struggles with mental health and how I was actually supporting myself for my own mental health, it made it safe for my team to understand that it was a priority for them. And I've since done research that actually says that it's when leaders do that, that it's the number one thing that can affect people's ability to understand that for their culture. And so I know it's very hard. We sort of have this culture of understanding, or have sort of been enculturated to this idea that as leaders, we have to have this constant, strong face. But really, when you're able to be vulnerable, that it can actually do so much more. And it can actually help prioritize for them that if I say I'm taking a mental health day, they say, oh, if Christina, my VP, can do that, I can do it too. It's safe for me to do that too, because now it's normalized. And so that's something to really consider, because you set the tone for the behaviors through your own behavior.
Well, yeah, thank you for sharing your personal challenges with that, and then how it fits into your work life. Looking over for other questions, Sybil. Sybil was one of our speakers. Thank you for that, Sybil. Sybil asks, what design leadership resources do you recommend, podcasts, etc.? And I know it can be kind of hard to do that off the cuff, and we can certainly put things in the show notes, but are there any things that you look to, that you regularly get info from? I know you mentioned a couple of books that were particularly helpful to you.
Yeah. Gosh, it is hard for me to think of off the cuff. I guess I would say, what type of resources are you looking for? Are you looking for sort of management? Are you looking for, sort of specifically, I'm curious a little bit more detail on specifically what aspect of design leadership.
And if Sybil, you want to put in more detail, and we can always add information to the chat afterward, I can follow up on that one. Let me just move over to Jeff Harrison, actually person that I work with at Blink, our head of design. Hi, Jeff. Jeff asks, how do you recommend achieving consistency throughout the organization? Processes, design quality, governance?
Yeah, those are great questions. So I think a lot of that, I sort of lump it into education a little bit, and also into management. And so one of the things that I do is I want to make sure that when I'm onboarding people, that they have an actual curriculum and way of working, so that they understand how we actually have a process. So one of the things that we do at Etsy is we have something called core practices. And it is sort of like a guild, or it has these sponsors of senior designers who will document different scenarios and how we apply at different stages of the design process, how we collaborate across at Etsy, and how we really work and do our jobs. And so that, for someone who may have not worked in that type of the job or may have not worked in that area, it really gives a playbook for how to explore. But also those design leaders become resources. So they will do lunch and learns, training, and actually be there for the new joiners or for someone who is attempting that, or maybe who is growing in their career, in order to be a resource to help and coach. And so that's how I actually believe in, one, growing also those design leaders into helping them up level their skills, but also how we disseminate information, that kind of type thing. But then I think also working on things like quality consistency through a really, really important crit process, right? I think as design, it's like our number one thing. You have to have a crit process. I think you also, as you get larger, you have to have visibility into what design is happening across the organization. And that's not just for me. What's most important is for people working in similar spaces to see across what each other is doing. So, of course, a design system, but to actually see the work that's happening in real time, and so that they can make connections. And so we have every 2 weeks something that we call Design Lightning, where everyone is showcasing their work. Everyone has 2 minutes. Not everyone goes every week. They have skip slides if they didn't present that week, but where everyone gets a chance to have full visibility into everyone else's work. And so we have quality checklists that people use. We also have a framework called shoppability, which is how shoppable is this work, and ways of evaluating our experimentation, our A/B testing. We have rigorous, basically A/B testing practices and ways of monitoring that and helping people get really good at experimentation so that they can actually, check out what they're doing. But I guess that's a really long list. I'm sure I've given you way more information than you needed.
Well, yeah, thanks for that detailed answer on that. And Sam has a comment and question. I really love the idea of applying the design process to process itself. Have you ever encountered this culture of experimentation and process refinement backfiring, possibly introducing a level of unpredictability or uncertainty in the workplace?
I will say that there's always going to be a moment where you run a test and you don't like the outcome. That's been something that's happened. Whenever you run a test, and this goes for any kind of experimentation, you have to be okay with what might come out of that outcome. And so if you're just like when you're putting it like 2 A/B tests up there, right? Like you have to be okay knowing that the B test might win. But the thing is that if you have this culture of experimentation and you green light a test and you're okay with that outcome, you also in the future can have another reason to run another test, right? So you have to also think about the long-term strategy that you're going for and the reason for why you're willing to run the test in the first place. Maybe you're in the moment willing to allow empowerment and give up something where in the future that empowerment will lead to something greater than the thing that you're giving up. So you have to play long-term chess for certain if you're in this culture of experimentation and not just go into it very, very, very eyes wide open, like eyes wide shut sort of type thing. You have to know what could come out of it. So I think it's actually a really, really important question.
I see another one of my colleagues from Blink who also has contributed during the event. Naya has asked, in what ways do you partner with recruiting to make sure that your design org is continuing to attract diverse candidates and proactively building a diverse pipeline?
Yeah. So I actually consider my recruiter a member of my team, that they are not someone who is separate in a separate department. So they come to a lot of our rituals. So they come to our quarterly all hands, they are in our channels, and we actually have twice a year in-person gatherings, and they are actually invited, and so that they have a chance to constantly socialize with our team. So I think first and foremost, you have to build a sense of community with your recruiter because they are then responsible for the community that they are building. And they are oftentimes more goaled against those diversity goals than even I am. And so you have to have a shared understanding of what their goals are as much as what my goals are. And so that's, I think, really, really important, is to understand your goals and where they overlap. And so, like I said, that thing like speed to fill the role versus DEI, that can sometimes be in conflict. And so that's going to be one of the main places where it will become an issue. And so that's always the time where we talk about, can I put someone in a rotation to take care of this position, or can I fill it with a long-term contractor or in a different way so that we actually have time to look for the right diverse candidate? That's oftentimes the way that we're going to make sure that we're doing everything we can to take care of it. And then the next thing is looking at someone's potential, and after they've joined, giving them all of the support and all of the training that they might need so that you can actually foster and grow. One of the things that we are doing at Etsy is we have an apprenticeship program for career switchers, for people from non-traditional backgrounds who are from underrepresented communities, because we believe in diversity so much that we want to help grow them from very junior starts of their career in product design to make sure that we can actually have a diverse pipeline for the longevity of their careers.
Well, Christina, I want to be respectful of your time. Do you have time for one more question if we have one?
I do, yeah.
Okay, looks like Molly has a comment and a question. Molly was one of our speakers today. Molly says, I loved your statement on courage. As a design leader, having the courage to make tough choices is paramount. To be a little vulnerable, this is Molly, to be a little vulnerable, I often feel anxiety around making tough calls because of the impact it can have on overall team culture and how those changes affect the overall mental health of the team. How have you personally made hard team choices yet maintained a culture of ongoing trust with all the members of the design org?
Yeah. So I have AMAs ask me anything once a month. And it's really important for me to demystify processes and actually what's going on with the business and what's happening. So there's a certain line where you can't disclose private information, like if you're exiting someone or that kind of situation, right? There are HR things that you can never fully disclose, but you can have a larger conversation about those HR processes so that they understand that. But my team knows that they can actually ask me anything and they will get an answer from me, and that I will explain it to them and I will explain the larger context to them. And that's the way that I foster trust with them. And they also know that what we're doing is always fair and person first. And so that's the way that I really work to foster trust. And I will actually say, I very rarely, I can't even think of the last time where I made a decision in a vacuum by myself. I actually consider my leadership team to be my checkpoint, that I actually work with my immediate direct reports, who are directors and senior directors, for a variety of decisions and bring them in a way that I think not a lot of other people do. One, because I'm training them for their next role in my level, but two, because they are closer to the people who we're making decisions about. And so they have more information and knowledge. And so if we are talking about these things together, we can see the entire picture and be as fair as possible. And so when people understand that that's also the way that we make decisions, that also gives them an understanding that everyone that needed to be consulted was consulted, and that we looked at things from all angles.
Well, thank you for that. You had so many great, robust, thoughtful answers to these questions, and thank you for such a great presentation. We really appreciate you taking your time to be with us to close out our event today.
Thank you all so much for having me.